PUAtraining.com.
Hey guys, it's Rich, and in this video I'm going to be talking about conversation, and it's actually a subject I've never directly tackled before, and that's because it is very complex. You can have an interaction that is funny but not deep and the girl will like you, or you can have a conversation where you connect deeply and you have no laughs at all and she could like you, or you could have neither of those and you're just aloof and she likes you. So there's so many different ways to go that it's difficult to give hard and fast rules on conversation. But I'm making this video because for the past few weeks I've been working with a guy, and it's a little bit different from my normal assignment. We went to a shopping mall and he was useless with the first 10 girls he spoke to, and then he had 5 minutes of coaching, and then he was great at getting girls' numbers. So, you know, day game's quite easy, so it worked very rapidly. But my assignment is to prepare him for a 1-hour date with a very, tough and demanding lady. So working with him on conversation has been the focus of it, and so that's how I come to this video, and I'm going to give you some very cool conversation principles that I think apply pretty much universally. First thing that I told him, obviously there was a lot of stuff about body language. I told him to sit down and relax into whatever seat he's sitting in, because he was perched on the edge and kind of fixed like that the whole time. I told him to gesture and be expressive when he talks and to hold good eye contact. So far, all things that you could guess. One of the things that he was doing that was a big mistake in my opinion was constantly smiling. So he'd meet the girl and he'd just be smiling immediately. Anything she said, he'd be smiling and nodding. And so we actually worked on giving him what I called a neutral face, where when he's got no reason to smile and he's not particularly happy that day and whatever, he just has a neutral face, and he'd do that, and immediately it was more attractive. I took a picture of him like that and the other way, showed it to all the girls. Everyone said he was way more attractive when he had his neutral face that can break into a smile or show different expressions, but most of the time is like that. When it came to the actual conversation, first thing we worked on was the structure. So he was asking a question, he was saying, where are you from, what do you do, what hobbies do you have, and he'd ask, 3-5 questions in a row. The girl would give the answer and he'd just say, cool, and then ask another question. We changed the structure so that he would ask a question, receive a response, and then make some kind of statement on it. And we did a lot of work on this because you can go from, you can do this, in a few different ways, and at the most advanced level, it's really powerful. So one of the things he asked, I think, was, what do you like doing? And the girl said she likes cooking, and he immediately asked what kind of food, and she said Italian food, and then he was like, well, what kind of dish? And she said, oh, this pasta with blah blah blah. And I was like, why would you do that? Why do you have nothing to say about the fact that she cooks? Why do you need to ask another question? So I told him, what kind of statements could you make in that moment? He said, well, I could talk about, how I don't really cook, I just do, fast food, I use microwave, or I eat out. And I was like, okay, so that's one thing you could say, which would be better than another question. What else could you do? And we got to eventually the best thing, which was thinking about, what she loves about cooking, how it can be a creative process, how you're experimenting with different ingredients, about how when you invite guests around and you cook something for them, it's a social affair, it's nicer than in a restaurant, and you get to feed people and see their reactions, give them something new that they've never maybe tried before, and everyone likes having a good home cooked meal, so it's that feeling of satisfaction. So we got him to craft statements where he could start to imagine himself in the woman's shoes and think, why would she love cooking? And then craft a statement where he says, so I guess that you feel blah blah blah, or someone who cooks might do it because blah blah blah, and then make this statement. What he noticed when he started doing this because I actually got him maybe 6 or 7 practice dates when I was spying with girls that he hadn't met before, and he started making these kinds of statements that were going into motivations and emotions behind people's actions. And when he started doing that, they were opening up more, and you started seeing the expression change from just like a a polite smile to one that is genuine, and they start becoming genuinely engaged. So it starts with a basic structure, question, statement, deeper question, or change subject, and then it moves on to the statements being kind of boring about yourself or impersonal, and then they become about her and why someone would do that. So the structure of the conversation was the first thing we did, and then he was having some amount of connection in the conversations. There was still a problem of attraction. And so I wanted to deal with this problem where he'd meet the girl and he'd just be smiling immediately and basically thinking, I like her, I want to be with her just based on her looks, and I don't care what she says. So I got him to write down a list, and I said, write down a list of the things that you'd like in a girlfriend. And he wrote down 16 things, and it was stuff like she has to support him in his work and the stuff he's doing, she has to like children and animals and things like that. He had 16 things. She couldn't be too much of a party girl, didn't want a girl that smoked. He had these 16 things. And I said, next time, I arranged one of these practice dates for you, I want you to come along and I want you to have in your mind, okay, she's pretty, so my first impression is good, but the next thing being, I wonder if she has, all of these things that I'm looking for. So that's the first part of it, is to change, something in the body language, something in the inner game when you go on a date. But the second thing it does is it makes the conversation more interesting, because you have a bit of a purpose. You want to find out these things, explore different areas. So that's why I got him to do it. And then in his conversation, he started asking questions, do you do this? And he'd ask it with kind of a question in face, she'd respond, and then he'd either approve of it or disapprove of it. So he'd ask the question, but then he'd need to show why it was important that he asked. So he'd say, oh, it's good that you like animals because it means you can look after, be responsible for something, and I like animals, blah blah. So he gives the reason why he is happy that she likes cats or whatever it is, which shows the reason for doing it. But in her mind, she sees that he's selective, he's thinking about he hasn't just given her a free pass. He's saying, I'd like it if you had this and this stuff's important to me. So that was important. Then he started getting better attraction. Now the next problem, and this is something a lot of guys have, is that sometimes from time to time the conversation just went dry. So what I did was I took my book, and because I'd forgotten what I'd put in there, but I'd put in there some questions for when you run out of stuff to say and just to put into a conversation. And I've got, do you remember your first day at school? I've got, if you could wake up tomorrow anywhere in the world, where would it be? Are your friends mostly men or women? What's the one thing you can't say no to? And what talents do you have that would surprise me? So just a few examples from the book. And what these do is, they just bring some hopefully interesting conversation to, that moment where you might have run out of stuff to say. So he started doing that. He liked the travel one. And you don't just say, what do you do, where you're from? Okay, if you could wake up tomorrow anywhere in the world. You lead into it. So you first think about, you ask her if she likes traveling and where she's been and stuff like this, and then you ask that question. And the other thing to make sure is that you've got a good answer to it. So she might ask you, and you, how about you? And you can't just say, I don't know. You have to be prepared that she's going to ask you back. So we got him doing that, and then it dealt mostly with that problem of running out of stuff to say in the middle of the interaction. Something else that changed a lot for him was leading. So he'd meet the girl, and because he was quite passive, a lot of women would just take control in that initial stage, and they'd say, where are you from, what do you do, and the same boring questions. But they'd be controlling the direction of the conversation and asking him questions. My view on this, when women ask you questions, especially on a date or in social circle situations is that they might do it just to be polite. So they might meet you and they might, ask you things to take the lead in the interaction to avoid uncomfortable silences and stuff like that. In that case, it's a big mistake to let them do it. It's very good to answer the first question, then take control, and you lead it from there. You need to lead the interaction towards your purpose, which is either, connecting with her, getting to know her better, seeing if she meets your criteria, getting to the point where you can suggest a date, whatever it is, but you need to be leading towards your purpose, which means you should always have in mind the direction of the conversation. However, if you do that in the beginning and then she becomes genuinely curious, you'll notice that when she's asking you questions, she's really, it's gone from just being polite, that kind of formality where they're like, oh, and what do you do, to being, no, but we've been talking for 30 minutes and you haven't even told me what you do, what do you do? And she's looking at you and she's listening and she's very, very curious. So we've covered tons of things already, but there's more. One of the things that he was doing is the kind of bad listening face. So the girls were reporting to me, it was almost like a scientific experiment. So I'd pause it, I'd talk to him, I'd talk to the girls, and I could see that the girls didn't like it when they were speaking because they didn't feel like he was listening. And that was because she'd be talking and he'd be like this, and he'd be nodding too quickly and like this, and you could just see in his eyes that he's thinking of the next question that he's going to ask. So we worked on that, and I told him, when she's speaking, just look into her eyes, try and build that picture of her, try and understand what it's saying about her, just let it wash over you, and when you've done that, pause, think about it, come up with the question then, or what you want to say, the next statement, and then make it, so be comfortable with the pause. He started doing that, and not only did it make them more comfortable speaking for longer, but it also made him able to generate a bit more attraction because you had that moment of cool, intense eye contact. So guys, it's very strange because I've been doing training for the first time in many years for a TV show, but it's very cool because I've been able to really identify how someone goes from having very boring short conversations where the girls want to run away to having like a 1 hour date with a very demanding, intelligent girl, and it goes great. So guys, hope you like that. That's my conversation tips, and I'll be back soon with more. Thank you.